You would think that the Greek islands are a laid-back place where time is insignificant, and for the most part, you would be absolutely correct. But there's one place in this region where appointments must be kept, where there are strict rules that have lasted for over 1,100 years. To visit this place, we needed a permit, which was organised many months before. There are also stringent clothing regulations, meaning no shorts or short sleeves, so the usual beach garb was packed away. If you want to step foot on this hallowed ground, there's a number of other restrictions you must adhere to also, all of which exist to maintain the sanctity of the place. The location I'm referring to is Mount Athos, where 20 monasteries sit on a 300 square kilometre peninsula. It's about as holy a slice of earth as you can find anywhere, and a location I've long wanted to visit, not particularly from a religious point of view, but to see what all the hubbub and mystery is about. Very excited. Right now we're about 2 hours drive from Thessaloniki. Mount Athos is right behind us, 50 kilometres of peninsula, 7 kilometres wide. This boat's going to take us there because you can't go by road. Special spot. Now I better get going. My priest's waiting for me, I better go. We're just having a few issues trying to get on because cameras are not allowed on Mount Athos. So we're all sorts of issues. They're not going to let us on. They know that we're taking the camera on. We can't hide that, you know? Yeah. But we've got a letter from. You've got that letter, haven't you? Despite all the paperwork and agreements in place, we still had to negotiate our way aboard. Countless phone calls to various powers, cajoling by Captain Yanni, requests from our office in Athens to the head abbot, and we were finally given permission to board the ferry. Mind you, it does help when you tell them that you've flown your parish priest all the way from Australia to escort you. Father Gerasimos, or Father G, as some of us know him, is my parish priest. His brother is a monk at Mount Athos, so who better to take me on this segment of my Odyssey? So you haven't seen your brother for 5 years. We're going to see him today. What are the emotions like?
Separation feels like someone's passed away. But the great joy is that you get to see them every now and then.
5 years? That's not every now and then, Father.
That's right.
Eh?
Yeah.
So what is the emotion? It's right now, how do you feel it?
Oh, it's measured anticipation. Yeah.
And I've got to tell you, major anticipation for me because I've read a lot about Mount Athos, but I'm not too sure what to expect. A lot of men, obviously.
Well, it's all men, and Mount Athos is a place of full spiritual commitment and dedication to the spiritual life.
Major sacrifice.
Sacrifice all the worldly things, the property, the money, and they maintain their virginity as well.
Yeah. Coming into the monastery of Vatopedi sent shivers down my spine. To say I was blown away is an understatement. My first thought was that I wished Helen was there to share that feeling with me, but that could never happen. We do everything together, and I know she, like my mother, would have loved this spiritual journey.
Well, the monastery in its present form was built in the late 10th century, and it was one of the first monasteries built on the Holy Mountain of the present era. There was a monastery that existed here before that time, which according to the tradition had been built by the Emperor Theodosius the Great in the late 4th century, on the place of a church built by Constantine the Great a few years before that. Vatopedi is the largest monastery in Greece today as far as the volume of its buildings go. It has about 10,000 square meters of living space.
And number of monks?
Number of monks, right now we're about 125.
How does that rank in the on the mountain?
It's the largest brotherhood in Greece.
Wow.
And we're still growing. When I came here in 1993, we were about 40, so the monastery has tripled.
This was more than just a step back in time. It was a leap through the ages. The architecture was medieval and spectacular. The stillness, absolute quiet and simplicity were unlike anything I'd experienced before. I felt humbled. It's definitely the perfect setting for meditation, collecting of thoughts, and of course, prayer.
You know, the common denominator I see in the Mount Athos Monastery is these big, thick defensive walls. In the first 2 centuries of settlement here in Mount Athos, there were 180 monasteries and 20,000 monks. And the only ones that survived through the Crusades and pirate attacks were these large monasteries with these big defensive walls. The monks actually used to defend themselves from all these pirate attacks. For the next 800 years, the monks learnt to negotiate an armistice with their conquerors, and that's why they survived these 1100 years.
These monasteries have had to endure many difficult times over the last 11 centuries. They've survived all types of crisis, from economic and political to the forces of nature and several wars. Today, vast numbers of pilgrims visit the monasteries in search of healing, solace and meditation. Others simply want to get away from the rat race and collect their thoughts. But most come here to be surrounded by the beautifully adorned buildings and reboot their spiritual journey in life. Making this your home is a major commitment. Only eating twice a day, praying for 5 hours in the morning, and having no women on the island would test even the most devout. I definitely wouldn't last long here.
The work that has been done here over the last 3 decades has been remarkable.
And how many monks are in here now?
It's about 123, and together with those monks, there'd be anywhere between 50 and 500 visitors daily.
And how many monks were there back in the 80s and 90s? There weren't many, were there?
In the 80s, there were about 10 monks left after a period of decline during the 20th century.
And now there's over 100, so it's really shot up, hasn't it?
Since the 90s, with the coming of a new brotherhood, which had new life, and I think the average age even now is about 35.
That's impressive. It's something you wouldn't expect here, is it? A lot of people think monks, you know, monasteries, everybody's old, but there's a lot of young people here.
There are, and they're actually quite educated, university trained.
I mean, your brother, how old's your brother?
My brother is in his mid-30s, and he was university trained himself in Australia, and he came here almost a decade ago.
So they're all young people. It's something you wouldn't expect. It's an amazing thing. I'm dying to find out why there's so many young guys coming here to give their life, to sacrifice everything for the rest of their lives here in the monastery. I'm dying to find, mind you, I'm dying to go into that place and have something to eat. Should we go?
Let's do that first.
Let's go.
The monks live by a code that centres around the celebration of God and a life of contemplation and sacrifice. Their daily life is a product of this code, and an example of its simplicity is their meals. The food is very raw, generally some fruit, vegetables, lentils, and fish once a week.
I don't think I've ever been in a dining hall this old. It's 1,000 years old. Just these marble tops, they're 1,500 years old. They were given to Vatopedi from a monastery in Constantinople from the 4th century. The abbot sits down there with the priests. All the monks sit in this space here. The pilgrims sit back there. Moments from now, everybody will be in here. It'll be full. I better grab a seat right now because I'm starved. Ready to go. Ooh, kiwi fruit in Mount Athos.
It felt a little awkward being served by a man of the cloth, but that's the way it is here. Monks grow and collect the vegetables from the field. They cook everything and then serve you. If you studied as an accountant, lawyer or doctor and want to take up life as a monk, then that's what you'll most probably be tasked with at the monastery. This place is a living, breathing city. It's almost totally self-sustained. They rely very little on the outside world. The majority of the food is grown here. They make their own clothes, provide basic medical treatment, maintain their equipment, and have minimal influence from beyond the monastery walls. You could easily see it as limiting, But for those that live here, this minimalist life is liberating. And if there's one thing I learned from this experience, when you eat only twice a day, the food tastes that much better.
Life for a monk and the pilgrims in Athos is an early morning and a long day. The bells just went off at 3 o'clock. And we even get snooze buttons. There's a guy, a monk, hitting sticks every 10 minutes to make sure you wake up for prayer. Now, we're not going to go to prayer. We're actually going to go to the kitchen and see him cooking fish this morning. So, I don't know why I'm being quiet, because everybody's up.
If the monk with the sticks doesn't wake you, the scent of frying fish certainly will. My nose led me to the kitchen. God only knows how they're praying through this at the moment. I, for one, was starving and the food smelled amazing.
There's about 8 or 9 monks working in here, and it's a well-organised kitchen. I mean, I worked in the kitchen before, and you can see that there's process happening. It's well organised. They know exactly what's going to happen next. They're feeding 130 monks and probably about 50 pilgrims this morning for breakfast. And it's 5 o'clock in the morning, so we're not far away from breakfast. They're all in prayer at the moment. These guys miss prayer. They'll do it later.
They not only fry and grill food for 200 people, the monks also catch and clean the fish from their own aquaculture farms. After having committed the same process for centuries, it's no wonder they've become incredibly efficient at it. This has to be the longest running vertically integrated business in the world. 1,100 years and they haven't gone broke. Maybe they should consider listing on Wall Street.
There's a real buzz. They're trying to ramp it up because they want to make the last hour of prayer, the 1 hour of liturgy at 8 o'clock. It's 20 past 5. I tell you what, the aroma is awesome. I'm starved. I don't know if I can wait for 3 hours.
As day breaks, at a time when most other people are still sound asleep, Mount Athos has already been awake for hours. The dramatic backdrop leaves you breathless. However, this is just another day in the life of the monastery. The kitchen is running at full steam preparing breakfast, while the rest of the monks are in prayer. They do this every morning. It's their job, praying from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. Only then will they eat. The pilgrims are invited to prayer. Here they will stand with the monks for hours. It's part of their sacrifice and of giving up your normal routine for what you believe in. This is where you see the monks' true devotion. This is a life that's tough for the average person to understand. We have our possessions, our jobs, and most importantly, our families. These things are hard to give up, and for the majority of us, it's impossible. But the monks have willingly left that life in the outside world behind them for something they believe is greater, the love of God. And this thought is what gives them purpose and fulfills them. It was expressed beautifully by all the monks I spoke with. However, none had a story more enthralling than the 3 Australian brothers I met who had found their home here all the way from the Gold Coast.
You are the one I'm most excited to meet. I have been thinking about your story for a year, and I'm sorry to make you all nervous, but it's a great story. When did you first come to Mount Athos?
First came in 2006. After being here for a period of time, my brothers came to visit.
Yep. Together?
Together, 2 brothers came.
Yep.
One had an experience here. It was, he stayed, the other went back. And my other brother came with my other brother, and he stayed, and the other one went back. So one sort of handed off the other.
Right. And so all 3 of you are now here?
Yeah.
How is life different here with your brothers, the experience that you had with your 2 brothers, compared to what it was like in Australia?
Our life here is more of a spiritual connection we have. It's more spiritual than anything. Whereas in the world, we had a connection, but it was more so worldly. Here we're on the same path, as well as we share the same sort of goal together.
And do you still have that same connection that you had? Have you lost that, or?
I think it's more, we're closer more so here.
Wow.
Because it's a life in Christ we live here, which is the true life. The worldly life has its human weaknesses in between, but the spiritual life is higher than the worldly life.
You're sacrificing your career, you're sacrificing your family, even though we have some minimal contact with them, obviously. We're sacrificing our own family that we could have had as well, all for Christ. And in essence, we are fulfilling the first commandment, which is to love God with your whole being, your mind, your soul, your heart. This is the fulfillment of the first commandment in absolution.
I was 14 when I first got here. We stayed for 2 days, forgot about that experience, and then came back here when I was 22.
And you've never left since?
And from then I'm still here.
So how many years have you been here?
7 years now.
7 years. And what did you do when you were in Australia before you came here?
I studied music and philosophy, and I was concerned about thinking about certain things, but I was pretty stuck onto my music.
Yep.
I started going out. I thought, oh, my friends are working in a bar, I'll start working in a bar as well. I was a barman for a couple of years, for a few years. And then I studied music, I'll start playing music. Started playing the music I enjoyed. And I was pretty much just living around that whole, getting as much joy, fun, happiness out of life as I could. But in doing that, I started to realise that there was something inside that was still empty. And I thought that it was probably just going to be filled by getting married, having a family, having that sort of a thing. I mean, I'd tried girlfriends, I'd seen sort of what it might be like getting married, and I realised that there's still something that's even deeper than a person's emotions. There's something that exists that's even more inside, that whatever happens, if a person doesn't have some spiritual connection, if a person doesn't touch onto God, then he could become 80 years old and not ever really have lived a second of his life.
Are there any regrets? I mean, are you happy to be here? Are there any teensy little regrets of not being?
For me, it wasn't. It was a matter of finding the will of God. And once I found it, that was it.
It seems absolute. It's the same answer I get from all of you. It's like you're singing from the same hymn sheet.
This is not something we've done, something God does for each one.
Even though I was incredibly happy in the world, I'd lived anything that anyone could dream to live. Like, there wasn't, all my friends had the thought, had the question, you were the happiest guy we knew, why would you chuck that stuff away? And it seemed strange at the time when I did it, but for me it was the most natural thing to do.
All that can happen without somebody having the monastic calling. It's something special which comes from above and calls someone to the monastic life. And not everyone gets that. So we have to respond to that calling, and we respond to that with our whole heart. And that's why we sacrifice all those things that we said before.
Talking about your brother, were you happy to see him after not seeing him for 5 years?
Of course I was happy to see him.
Yeah. But he doesn't drink coffee. You don't drink coffee either as well, do you?
Rarely.
Rarely?
I'm still young and strong, so I can last in the services when it's dark, so you need to force yourself a bit.
I think, listen, we've got very little time together as brothers and sisters, so why don't we go and have a coffee with him? We'll convince him to have a coffee, eh?
Okay. I might have a tea.
Okay, no, let's go. At the monastery of Vatopedi, the sound of a mallet tapping rhythmically on a board is the centuries-old way of gathering monks for prayer, food, or to wake of a morning. With over 10,000 square metres of floor space, you can understand why it takes the monk a while to get around each time. No doubt he's a fit guy too, racking up plenty of steps on his daily routine. At the moment, he's waking up everyone from their afternoon naps and getting them to Mass, which will last another few hours before dinner. Again, this happens every day. Some monks still look as though they could do with a little more sleep, but the work has to continue, regardless of how one feels. Tradition is important here. It dates back a millennia, so change is not overly welcome. The old guard maintains control of how everything operates and educates and mentors the new arrivals with this new way of thinking and into embracing the strict way of life. So in order for there to be any variation in the processes,
it would take somewhat of a revolution. Although from what I see with the younger generation, they're chipping away at it, albeit very slowly. One thing they've modernised a little is their farming practices. In order to feed all the new arrivals and service their ever-growing export demands, the monks have embraced certain contemporary agricultural luxuries. You know, modern society over the last 10 or 20 years have become sustainably conscious. But here at Vatopedi at Mount Athos, they've been doing it for over 1,000 years. And not only do they do it well, but they sell their product to the outside. And they do it on the best real estate, in the best climate on this earth. Have a look at this. Working the land for centuries, these monks have learned a thing or two about agriculture, and to a greater extent, business. They export a number of products, ranging from skincare, shampoo, herbal creams, and therapeutic soap to books and iconography. It's a well-oiled machine that has lasted the test of time. As the world has developed massive technology-filled cities, this monastic state has battled through the ages with little or no change to their community's way of living. It's a long movie on pause, and no one wants to press the play button. It's certainly got both its ardent followers and others that want to pull this male-only institution into the 21st century. To be honest, I can understand both views. In the end, even though I couldn't share this experience with Helen, I must say, the small sacrifices I had to make and spending a few days away from my family were well worth it. Well, everything comes to an end, and my stay at Mount Athos at Vatopedi finishes now. I've got to tell you, it was an experience that I'll never forget. I was a bit underwhelmed coming here because I had to put the long sleeves and the long pants on, and it was like I was being prepared. But I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. My whole view of what a monk does and his life has changed. They're just like you and I. My whole view of Mount Athos has changed. It's been a spiritual enlightenment. I loved it. The architecture, the food, the people, the sustainability, it's been absolutely awesome. It's something I'll take with me to the grave.